Islamic terrorists killed hundreds in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday. But what's key beyond the horror was that the targeted country was aware of the threat. And this nugget from USA Today, quote, the country's prime minister and his cabinet were unaware of the intelligence until after the attacks due to political dysfunction. Political dysfunction, which is really code for deadly incompetence and taking your eye off the ball. It's something to remember as our media invites us to chase phantoms of their own making, lost in fever dreams over collusion, obstruction, impeachment, hate hoaxes, Stormy and Avenatti, is that real evil still stalks this planet. And terror is liquid, always seeking the path of least resistance. And that path is often carved by our own distractions, sparked by those who see politics as far more important than our safety. Which is why terror couldn't compete with the Mueller report even on Easter. Nothing matters except winning that news cycle. But hey, it happened far away. And in America, it's a peaceful time. But only because there are people you don't know making sure it's still peaceful. Until one day when terror strikes us at home, as it has before. We can't forget that America is terror target number one, and that our number one priority isn't impeachment, but security. Our borders, grid, landmarks, water, food supply, everything's up for grabs in a time where terror has smartphones too. And when something big finally strikes, winning a news cycle looks more than petty. It's downright dangerous. Emily, we've talked about this before. Al-Qaeda can come and go. ISIS can be disappeared, but there will always be an ideology, and an ideology will always give birth to something new, I think.
I agree. And we've also talked about it in the context of that there needs to be some type of detailed and plan leveled so that the global messaging that's happening with Islamic terrorism and those kind of fundamentalists, we need to address that. And I agree with you that when you hoard information and when you have political infighting that prevents you from sharing that information, that costs lives. And we are on a dangerous trajectory as well, not to be a fearmonger, but we are as well. If this is the ball that some people are focused on, it should be security. It should be security first, 100%. But I think, yes, that the messaging is important because that's traveling around the world.
Dana, they had, I guess, 2 weeks advance warning. Did they not take it seriously, or was it just something that just got lost?
They'll have to find out. I mean, but what a way to figure it out afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, Secretary Pompeo was quite gracious today, actually, to the Sri Lankans, saying that we will help, we will provide all this. But we have been helping, and we help all of these countries. And maybe they don't get enough foreign aid as they would like, but they have to do something for us, too. They have to be willing to share the information with each other, or at least with us.
Right.
Because I got this statistic today from the Brain Room. Since 2012, 23,177 Christians have been killed for faith-related reasons. 23,000. That is abhorrent. It is unacceptable. And if we are going to provide aid, and we're going to provide intelligence services, we're going to provide sharing, maybe military gear, whatever it is that they need, the least they could do is pass it up the chain that there was going to be an attack that could have been prevented.
Juan, there were 8 coordinated detonations. This is a group that we've never heard of, but it's kind of the same thing, right? I mean, it just mutates, changes, evolves, gets better.
Right. So this is the argument that we have. You know, before I start that, let me just say, so the kids that died. There's a kid, there's a 5th grader from Sidwell Friends in D.C. There were 3 of the 4 children of a Danish billionaire, who's the biggest landowner in Britain. And I just can't imagine the depths of his sadness. Japanese people were killed. So this was a worldwide event in that sense. It touched us all. And I think it's important to also keep in mind, and we see it here in the U.S., more security on our churches in the aftermath of this, and there were some suspicions going back to Notre Dame in Paris. Luckily, apparently, that was an accident. But I would say this, when you hear people say, oh, ISIS is defeated, I worry about it. Why do I worry? Because people might think, well, then we don't have a threat. But we do have a threat. We have a threat, as you described it. I think you said, water goes wherever there's an opening.
Right.
So what we see is that this ideology now shifts. And we never heard of this group. All of a sudden, here they pop up, and they're bombing a church in Sri Lanka, and they're going after Christians. So to me, this is a generational fight. The ideology, unfortunately, is not defeated, and we as Americans cannot lose sight of the fact that we're in an ongoing fight. And when the president boasts, for whatever reason, that ISIS is defeated, don't be fooled. We've got to keep up not only the attention, but the fight. And with regard to the intelligence, we know there are all sorts of arguments about, did we know what was coming on 9/11? And you know what? You can blame them. You can say they're incompetent. They're not the U.S. government, not U.S. intelligence, not Israeli intelligence. They're not British. But the fact is, the people responsible are the terrorists.
Well, right. Can I clarify that, though? I mean, because after 9/11 is when we took down the wall between intelligence and law enforcement.
Yeah.
That made a big difference. Then we stepped up efforts all around the world to make sure that those governments where you knew there were hotspots would have what they needed in order to share, to have the information, to have the equipment that they needed. We learned a lesson.
Correct.
From 9/11, and if we're going to help these countries, the least they can do is they had the information, they just didn't pass it on.
Correct. I think that we have made changes and we have adapted post 9/11. But I just don't like the idea that we would say, well, it's their failure, their fingerprint. People did that to us. I didn't like it. I didn't think it was fair to us, to our government. I think the terrorists are the ones who should be held responsible.
So, Jesse, we've seen different responses to this. Some are pretty odd.
Yeah.
Would you care to pick the ones that disgust you most? Or?
Well, I have the Washington Post right here, and it's just kind of disgusting. Christianity under attack. Sri Lanka church bombings stoke far-right anger in the West. And it's a whole article not about editorializing about radical Islam murdering people. It's editorializing and saying, oh, Christians are upset that churches are being bombed. And they're making Christians and conservatives out to be the villains for reacting to terrorist attacks. Look at some of the leading Democrats, how they characterized it. They didn't use Christians. They didn't say a lot of churches. They actually said Easter worshipers were under attack. Now, you don't call Muslims Ramadan worshipers. You don't call Jews Passover worshipers. It's a made-up phrase. And I think, why do they make up phrases like this? And this is one of the reasons why people don't trust liberals, because they're not in touch with reality. They do this because they're pandering to Muslims. Because a lot of liberals feel that they are so obsessed with how other people think about them. And if they're thought of to be insensitive, that drives them crazy. And second of all, they think their own rhetoric causes Islamic extremism. Remember, blame America first. They think Islamophobia causes radical Islam, so they do whatever they can to sanitize it. Now, BuzzFeed actually came out, one of their editors, and said, wow, President Trump, imagine how outraged he'd be if whites were the victims of the Sri Lanka attack. And I just found that completely despicable to play the race card after a terrorist attack. It's what they did in Katrina. Remember Bush? Oh, he would have acted faster if there were white victims in Louisiana. And when I step back and think about, conservatives are pretty colorblind when it comes to life. They don't talk about the different races of babies in the wombs. They want to protect all life. And it's a lot of conservatives in the media who talk about stopping the carnage in the south side of Chicago. So I think it's really unfair when the media always, no matter who does it, if it's a white perpetrator, Muslim perpetrator, Hispanic perpetrator, they just take the violence and they try to turn it against the president or his supporters. And I think it's shameful.
All right. Well, let's move on, shall we?